Marcus Williams stood frozen in his penthouse doorway, briefcase slipping from his numb fingers. Before him, his house manager Grace spun in elaborate circles, colorful fabrics swirling around her like a butterfly's wings. But what stopped his heart wasn't the dancing. It was his 12-year-old son David, paralyzed from the waist down, sitting forward in his wheelchair, clapping his hands and laughing with pure joy for the first time in 3 years. "What exactly is going on here?" Marcus's voice cut through the music like a blade. Grace froze mid-spin, her colorful wraps settling around her like deflated dreams. David's laughter died instantly, his small hands falling limp in his lap as shame washed over his face. If you want to know how this heartbreaking scene led to the most beautiful love story you'll ever hear, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. Let me take you back to where this story began, in the heart of Lagos, Nigeria, where the bustling energy of Victoria Island couldn't penetrate the silence that had swallowed the Williams home whole. Marcus Williams was the kind of man who turned everything he touched into gold. At 45, his tech company had revolutionized mobile banking across West Africa, making him one of Lagos's most successful entrepreneurs. His penthouse overlooked the lagoon, filled with the finest furniture money could buy. But all his wealth couldn't purchase what he needed most, his son's happiness. 3 years ago, a drunk driver had shattered their world. The crash that killed David's mother, Elena, had also severed his spinal cord, confining the bright, musical boy to a wheelchair. Since then, David had retreated into a silence so profound that Marcus sometimes wondered if he'd lost both his wife and son that terrible night. "He won't even try the physiotherapy anymore," Dr. Sarah Chen explained during their latest consultation, her kind eyes filled with concern. David's physical condition could improve with proper exercise, but his emotional state is preventing any progress. "He's given up, Mr. Williams." Marcus had tried everything: child psychologists, private tutors, even flying in specialists from London and New York. Nothing worked. The boy who once filled their home with piano melodies and laughter now spent his days staring out his bedroom window, barely speaking except for basic needs. The house staff couldn't handle it either. 3 caregivers had quit in 6 months, each complaining about David's withdrawn behavior and their inability to connect with him. "We need someone different," Marcus told his business partner James during lunch at their usual spot in Ikoyi. "Someone who won't give up on him." That's when Grace Adebayo entered their lives. At 28, Grace possessed the kind of quiet strength that comes from weathering life's storms without losing your faith in sunshine. She'd been a music teacher at a prestigious private school until budget cuts eliminated her position. Now she needed work, and the Williams family needed hope, though neither realized it yet. "I don't expect miracles," Marcus told Grace during their first meeting, his voice heavy with the weight of repeated disappointments. "David doesn't engage with anyone. Just keep him safe, make sure he eats, and don't take his silence personally." Grace nodded, studying the family photo on Marcus's desk, a happier time when Elena's smile lit up the room and David's eyes sparkled with mischief. "May I ask what he loved most before the accident?" "Music," Marcus replied without hesitation. His mother was teaching him piano. He was so gifted, but he won't touch the instruments anymore. "We've left everything in his room, hoping someday." For Grace's first 2 weeks, the pattern remained unchanged. David acknowledged her presence with barely perceptible nods, accepted the meals she prepared, and returned to his window watching. Grace didn't push. Instead, she observed. She noticed how David's breathing changed when she hummed while organizing his room. How his head tilted slightly when she moved with rhythm while dusting. Most importantly, she saw the instruments in his bedroom, dusty but tuned, as if waiting for their master's return. It was during her 3rd week that Grace discovered David's schedule with scientific precision. Every day at exactly 3 p.m., Marcus left for business meetings. The house fell into its familiar silence, except for the soft sounds of David's breathing from his room. This is when Grace made a decision that would change everything. It started small, gentle humming while she cleaned David's room. Traditional Yoruba lullabies her grandmother had sung mixed with contemporary melodies that seemed to flow from her heart. When she noticed David's breathing pattern change, indicating he was awake and listening rather than napping, she added simple movements to her work. A graceful reach while dusting high shelves became a dance. Folding laundry transformed into choreography. Grace wasn't performing for David. She was creating an atmosphere where joy could exist again, hoping it might be contagious. Day by day, her secret performances grew bolder. Grace brought colorful Ankara fabrics from home, draping them around her shoulders as she worked. She began acting out stories through song and movement, tales of brave warriors, clever princesses, and magical creatures that her grandmother had shared during her childhood in Ibadan. What Grace didn't know was that David had begun positioning his wheelchair where he could secretly watch through his slightly cracked bedroom door. The breakthrough came during her 4th week. Grace was performing the story of a young eagle who believed he couldn't fly after injuring his wing. As she reached the emotional climax, the moment when the eagle discovered his wings worked perfectly and soared above the clouds, she heard something that made her freeze mid-flight. David was humming along. From that day forward, their secret afternoon world expanded. David began wheeling himself closer to his doorway during the performances. Grace, pretending not to notice, made her stories more elaborate, her dances more expressive. She brought small drums and shakers, encouraging rhythm without directly asking David to participate. Soon, she could hear him tapping his fingers against his wheelchair, then clapping softly, then, miracle of miracles, attempting to sing along with melodies he remembered from his mother's lessons. Once upon a time, Grace would begin each story dance. There lived a prince who thought he was broken. And David would lean forward, hungry for tales that somehow mirrored his own journey while offering hope for different endings. The transformation was subtle but profound. David began eating better, sleeping more peacefully, and even attempting small conversations with Grace during their regular interactions. But their magical afternoon sessions remained their secret, a sacred space where healing happened through rhythm and rhyme. Everything changed on a Thursday afternoon in October. Marcus had forgotten important documents and returned home unexpectedly, parking quietly in the underground garage. As he rode the elevator up, he heard something impossible. Music and laughter coming from his own living room. He approached slowly, unsure whether to trust his ears. The sight that greeted him would replay in his mind for years to come. Grace stood in the center of their spacious living room, transformed. Vibrant fabrics flowed around her as she danced with the grace of a professional performer, her voice soaring through a song about a brave prince who saved his kingdom not with his legs, but with the power of his heart and mind. But it wasn't Grace's performance that stopped Marcus's world, it was his son. David sat in his wheelchair just inside the doorway, fully present in a way Marcus hadn't seen since before the accident. The boy was clapping enthusiastically, his face radiant with joy. Most incredibly, he was singing along, his young voice blending perfectly with Grace's melody. As Marcus watched from his hidden position, David began moving his upper body to the rhythm, swaying side to side with such happiness that tears sprang to his father's eyes. This wasn't the broken, silent child who haunted their home. This was the vibrant boy Marcus thought he'd lost forever. Grace's story reached its climax as the prince realized his true strength came not from his physical abilities but from his courage to keep loving even when life was difficult. As she spun in a final, triumphant circle, David burst into applause and laughter so pure it seemed to cleanse the very air. "Bravo! Bravo!" David called out, his voice stronger than Marcus had heard in years. "Tell another one, Grace. Please. What would you like to hear, my brave prince?" Grace asked, not yet noticing Marcus in the doorway. "The one about the father and son who get lost but find each other again," David requested, his eyes shining. It was then that Marcus stepped forward, his emotions a storm of joy, confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to anger. "What exactly is going on here?" The words came out harsher than he intended, But seeing David's immediate transformation from joy to shame fueled something dark in Marcus's chest. Grace stopped mid-gesture, her colorful wraps settling around her like deflated dreams. David's laughter died, his small hands falling limp as he looked between the two adults with growing fear. "Papa, David started. "Go to your room," Marcus commanded, his voice cold with misplaced authority. "Now." As David wheeled himself away, casting desperate glances back at Grace, Marcus turned to face the woman who had somehow infiltrated their carefully controlled world. "My office." "Now," he said. In the heavy silence of his home office, Marcus's successful businessman persona took full control. Here, surrounded by awards and business photos, he felt equipped to handle what he interpreted as a betrayal. "Explain yourself," he demanded, not offering Grace a seat. Grace stood with quiet dignity, her earlier joy completely extinguished. "I was helping David." "Helping him?" Marcus's voice rose. "By turning his condition into some kind of entertainment? By making a spectacle of his disability?" "Mr. Williams, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Marcus interrupted, his pain masquerading as anger. "My son is not your personal audience. He's not a prop for your performances. You're supposed to be his caregiver, not his entertainer." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure. David was participating because he wanted to. The music was helping him. "Don't." Marcus held up his hand. "Just don't. I've seen enough helpers come through here promising miraculous breakthroughs. David doesn't need false hope. He needs stability, routine, and people who won't abandon him when the novelty wears off." The words hung between them like a wall. Grace could have explained about David's secret participation, his growing confidence, the way music was awakening something beautiful in him. But doing so would betray the trust of a boy who was just learning to hope again. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "It won't happen again." Marcus studied her face, expecting arguments or explanations that never came. Her quiet acceptance should have satisfied him, but instead, it left him feeling hollow. "See that it doesn't," he said, dismissing her with a kind of cold efficiency he used in business negotiations. The next few weeks transformed their home into a tomb of regret. Grace continued her duties with professional detachment, but the light had gone out of her movements. David, sensing the change, retreated deeper into his silence than ever before. Each day at 3 p.m., he would position his wheelchair hopefully near his doorway, only to watch Grace perform mundane chores with mechanical precision. "He's regressing," Dr. Chen told Marcus during David's next appointment. "Whatever progress we made seems to have reversed. Has anything changed in his routine?" Marcus avoided her probing gaze. "Nothing significant." But David's regression was impossible to ignore. He stopped eating properly again, refused physiotherapy sessions, and spent entire days staring out his window without speaking. The brief spark of life Marcus had witnessed was fading like a dying ember. It was James who finally confronted the truth Marcus was avoiding. "You're killing that boy," his business partner said bluntly during one of their regular check-ins. They sat in Marcus's study, financial reports scattered between them, but James's attention was focused on his friend's troubled face. "Don't be dramatic," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "I've known you for 15 years, Marcus. I've never seen you this miserable, and I've never seen David this far gone. What really happening?" Marcus found himself recounting the afternoon discovery, but as he spoke, James's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Let me get this straight," James interrupted. "You found your son, who hasn't smiled in 3 years, laughing and participating in something musical, and you stopped it?" She was taking advantage. Of what? A boy who needed joy in his life. James stood up, pacing to the window. "Marcus, when was the last time you saw David truly happy?" The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus realized with growing horror that the afternoon he'd interrupted had been the first time since Elena's death that David had seemed genuinely alive. "Talk to Grace," James urged. "Really talk to her. Ask her what was actually happening instead of assuming the worst." That evening, Marcus found Grace in the kitchen preparing David's barely touched dinner. In the soft light, he could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the careful way she moved to avoid any action that might be construed as joyful. "Grace," he began, his usual commanding tone replaced by something much more vulnerable. "I need to understand what was really happening that day." She looked up, surprised by the change in his voice. For a moment, neither spoke. "David was participating because he chose to," she said quietly. "I never forced anything. The music, it was bringing him back to life." "Why didn't you explain that when I confronted you?" Grace's smile was sad but not bitter. "Because David trusted me with his secret joy. I couldn't betray that trust, even to save my job." The simple dignity of her answer broke something loose in Marcus's chest. Here was a woman who had prioritized a child's emotional safety over her own job security, and he had punished her for it. "I'm a music teacher," Grace continued. "Or I was, before the school closed. I know how powerful music can be for healing. David wasn't my entertainment. He was my student, and he was learning to hope again." Marcus felt the full weight of his mistake settling on his shoulders. "What can I do to fix this?" "Let me help him," Grace said simply. "Let me show him that music is still his friend, even if everything else has changed." The next afternoon, Marcus made a decision that required more courage than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. Instead of leaving for his usual meetings, he hid in the dining room, positioning himself where he could observe the living room without being seen. At exactly 3 p.m., Grace entered the space carrying her colorful fabrics and a small drum. She stood for a moment, looking around the room where their magic had once lived, then began to hum. It started tentatively, just gentle melody and simple movements. But gradually, as if awakening from a long sleep, Grace's natural grace returned. She began to dance, her voice growing stronger as she wove a story about healing and second chances. Marcus watched his son's bedroom door, holding his breath. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the door opened wider. David's wheelchair appeared in the doorway, the boy's face showing desperate hope mixed with fear of disappointment. Grace's story was about a father and son who got lost in a dark forest but found their way home by following the sound of their hearts beating in harmony. As her dance reached its emotional peak, David began to move. First, it was just his hands tapping against his wheelchair. Then his upper body began swaying. Finally, impossibly, David started to sing along, his young voice blending with Grace's in perfect harmony. But the real miracle came next. As the story reached its climax, the moment when the father and son found each other again, David began trying to move his legs. The movements were small, probably involuntary responses to the music's rhythm, but they were movements nonetheless. Something Marcus hadn't seen since the accident. Tears began streaming down David's face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure joy, of connection, of feeling truly alive for the first time in 3 years. "I can feel it, Grace," David called out, his voice breaking with emotion. "I can feel the music in my whole body." Marcus couldn't contain himself any longer. He stepped out of his hiding place, tears streaming down his own face, no longer caring about maintaining composure or control. "Papa!" David turned toward his father, face radiant. Did you see me moving to the music?" Instead of words, Marcus walked straight to his son and enveloped him in the kind of embrace they hadn't shared since before their world shattered. Grace continued her melody, now softer, allowing it to become the soundtrack for their reunion. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered into David's hair. "I'm so sorry I tried to stop your happiness." "Grace saved me, Papa," David said, looking over at the woman who had given him back his joy. She taught me that being different doesn't mean being broken. Marcus looked up at Grace, this remarkable woman who had seen potential where he had seen only limitations. I owe you an apology. And so much more. What happened next transformed not just David's recovery, but the entire Williams household. Grace's music therapy became an official part of David's daily routine. Dr. Chen was amazed by his progress, not just emotionally, but physically. The joy and rhythm from their sessions were actually stimulating his nervous system in ways that traditional physiotherapy hadn't achieved. It's remarkable, the doctor explained to Marcus during a follow-up visit. The combination of emotional engagement and rhythmic movement is creating new neural pathways. David's showing muscle response in his legs that we haven't seen since the accident. Marcus began joining their afternoon sessions, initially as an observer but gradually as a participant. Grace taught him simple rhythms and movements, showing him how to connect with his son through music rather than just worry. I was a terrible dancer before the accident too, David giggled one afternoon, watching his father attempt a particularly challenging step sequence. Then we're perfectly matched, Marcus laughed, and the sound of their shared joy filled every corner of the house. As weeks turned to months, Marcus found himself looking forward to their musical afternoons more than any business meeting. Grace's wisdom extended beyond music. She had an intuitive understanding of healing that went deeper than any medical textbook. You're not the same man who hired me, Grace observed one evening as they prepared dinner together while David practiced piano in the living room. Is that a good thing? Marcus asked, suddenly unsure. It's a beautiful thing, Grace replied, her smile warm with affection that had grown slowly, naturally, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. It was David who finally voiced what they were all feeling but too afraid to name. During one of their music sessions, as they finished a particularly joyful song about family and love, David stopped playing mid-note and turned to face both adults. Grace should be my new mama, he announced with the startling clarity that only children possess. She already loves us like family, and Papa, you smile now when you look at her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was full of recognition. Marcus realized that what he felt for Grace had grown from something much deeper than gratitude. It was built on admiration for her character, her strength, her refusal to give up on their family when they had given up on themselves. David, Marcus began carefully, that's a very important decision. Grace might have different feelings. I don't, Grace interrupted softly, her eyes meeting Marcus's with quiet certainty. I don't have different feelings at all. Their wedding took place 6 months later in the same living room where Grace's secret performances had begun. David played piano for the ceremony, his legs showing enough improvement that he could use the pedals with assistance, a miracle none of them had dared to hope for. As Grace and Marcus exchanged vows, they incorporated promises not just to each other, but to the healing power of music, joy, and never giving up on love even in its most unexpected forms. I promise to dance with you through all of life's songs, Marcus said, tears in his eyes as he looked at the woman who had taught them both how to hope again. And I promise to help you remember that broken things can still make beautiful music, Grace replied, her hands gentle on his face. David's speech as their unofficial best man brought tears to every eye. Grace didn't just teach me to dance again, she taught Papa and me that love comes in many different rhythms. Some are fast and exciting, some are slow and peaceful, but they're all beautiful if you listen with your heart. 1 year later, the Williams house had become something Marcus never thought possible. A home filled with daily music, laughter, and the kind of love that heals old wounds while creating new dreams. David's physical progress continued to astound his medical team. While he remained in his wheelchair for longer distances, he could now stand for short periods and take several steps with assistance. More importantly, his joy was infectious, spreading to everyone who met him. Marcus had learned to balance his business success with family priorities, often bringing clients home to meet his remarkable wife and son. Their story had become legendary in Lagos's business community, not as a tale of charity or obligation, but as proof that the most powerful force in the world was still love. The folk tale of their love had spread through their community, inspiring other families facing similar challenges. Grace had started a music therapy program at the local children's hospital, with David often accompanying her as a volunteer assistant. "Every person has a song inside them," David would tell new patients. "Sometimes we just need help remembering how to let it out." Their story taught everyone who heard it that healing comes in many forms, sometimes through medicine, sometimes through therapy, but always through the simple act of refusing to give up on someone you love. Grace had come to their home as a house manager. She had become David's teacher, Marcus's wife, and the keeper of their family's most beautiful song. The melody that had started as a secret performance had grown into a symphony of love that would play on for generations. Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness. Sometimes healing comes through rhythm and rhyme. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the person who saves your family becomes your family. Did this story touch your heart? Share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of love and second chances. Subscribe for more incredible stories that celebrate the triumph of hope over despair, and comment below with your own experiences of unexpected love. Remember, every person has a song inside them. Sometimes we just need help remembering how to let it out.